Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and welcome to Howard University. And this is, even for my family, I think this is the first time you came to our place, and this is our community. Welcome to also Dr. Saleh. Thank you for coming, Dr. Jones, and all my colleagues and here, and thank you for everyone. Thank you for our students. Today is a very special day, and also our speakers are very special because we have for Dr. Jimmy Jones. Of course, I told them both that you have their bio, but maybe you don't know about our relationships with both of them. So Dr. Jimmy Jones, he's been my mentor for a while. I don't know how many years. You don't have to say. Maybe since 1990. And his relationship with my father, of course, it went back to when he was in SIS, which is Islamic Social Sciences. At that time, I remember how much my father was so happy to receive him and his wife and the students in Egypt when they took a group of students. I don't know if you remember or not, but this is one of the memory of my father, how much he was happy, Dr. Jimmy Jones bringing the group of students to Egypt and welcome them there. Dr. Jimmy Jones also, he's someone who I learned a lot from his journey of building the seminary. This is TISA, and this seminary is his baby. And I have been working with him and Dr. Iqbal and many others. And this, it teaches us as long as you have a clear objective and goal, you just maybe it takes time to achieve and to fulfill this goal. But as long as you know you will achieve this, that's what you have to work on. So, and also Dr. Jimmy Jones, really, his experience, his long experience with African American communities, with Muslim communities. I always go back to him to ask him whenever the challenges that we have. And when we used to go to Yale for the conference, I found myself among so many people, students, old and young, surrounding him, seeking his advice and seeking his love, because this person will introduce maybe the intellectual part of his experience, but I wanted just to let you know about Dr. And this is just a small thing because I have so many stories about it, but we want all of us to listen to his speech today and his experience with building Islamic Seminary in America. Thank you for coming.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good evening and welcome to all the people who have assembled here. I want to admit that I feel like an imposter. People know about the imposter syndrome, where people feel like, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. And I feel like an imposter 3 times tonight. First of all, this is I think this is my first time speaking at a historically black college and university, which is an odd thing since my undergraduate degree is from Hampton University, which is a historically black college and university. And when I got my doctorate, the people I wrote to about teaching were historically black college and university, and they didn't answer me, right? So I feel a little bit like I don't, somehow I didn't merit a letter. Or the second imposter syndrome is when Dr. Iqbal Yunus, who's here tonight, reached out to me on behalf of Dr. Taha to invite me to be on the faculty of the School of Islamic and Social Sciences. I am not a religious scholar in Islam. I'm just not. And this is a school of Islamic and Social Sciences, and I'm saying, what am I doing here? Then the third imposter is Dr. Iqbal again. I'm the executive vice president of the Islamic Seminary of America, right? Dr. Iqbal knows this. The first vice president of our board, Professor McGee, who's here, knows this. I never wanted to be in charge of this affair, simply because I felt that the people who should be in charge of a school for training Islamic leaders should really be high caliber in terms of Islamic studies. But as Allah Ta'ala would have, as God would have it, right? We had a situation where somebody had to step in, and the price was right. They didn't have to pay me a whole lot. And I became the executive vice president. This is a special honor for me. Dr. Taha was very, very special to me. He was one of my mentors. And what I, again, keeping with the imposter syndrome, I'm probably going to learn more from you than you from me. I love teaching. I usually learn more from my students than they do learn from me, simply because I think of teaching as education for me, and I get excited about it every time I walk into the classroom. And so what I'm going to talk about is sort of my journey from sort of way back when I was 6 years old up until now. That's 70 years, by the way, folks. So did you bring your food? So if you look at this slide, the next slide, please, you'll see a picture of Dr. Taha and my favorite book by him. And one of the reasons that it's my favorite book by him is because I think back then when he wrote the book, he had some very interesting things to say in the first chapter about the context, next slide please, in which he was writing the book. He said, arguably the most dangerous disease which now afflicts the Muslim Ummah, the Muslim community, is the disease of disagreement and discourse. Unfortunately, this hasn't gone away. And unfortunately, when we look at religions, particularly the so-called Abrahamic religions in the United States right now, this has not gone away. It is a major problem that we bicker and argue with each other in a way that's very, very destructive, that seems to go against the core values of our religion. And Dr. Taha felt this, and he spoke about this many, many times in his work. And this book, Ethics of Disagreement, whenever I run into community that's having a problem, I recommend particularly the first chapter of this book, because he talks about the disease, and then he talks about how our beloved prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions handled discord. And one of the things that we often forget as just Christians, Jews, and Muslims, that we have in our history the tools for dealing with many of the situations that we find today. And so it is for Muslims, we have in our history the tools for dealing with the situation you find today. So even though I feel like an imposter, how did I get here? First of all, I think of myself as being religiously rooted. Next slide, please. And there are three institutions that come to mind when I talk about religiously rooted. One is High Street Baptist Church in Roanoke, Virginia. Most of you never heard of Roanoke. You have to be going to Roanoke. People who know Roanoke, you don't pass through Roanoke. You know, there are lots of people pass through D.C., right? They pass through New York. Nobody passes through Roanoke. You have to be going there. It's in Southwest Virginia, right? So High Street Baptist Church in Roanoke, Virginia, the Graduate School of Islamic, and it was founded, by the way, in 1884, before I was even born. The Graduate School of Islamic Social Sciences was founded in 1996. And TISA, we open our doors, we've been around for a while, we open our doors for classes in 2019. Let's talk about the three of them. Next slide, please. Next. This is the High Street, the original, the one that I remember growing up in, the High Street Baptist Church. My religious roots today go back to that High Street Baptist Church. The point is that I learned to love, we say Allah now, but to love God in the High Street Baptist Church Angelic Choir. Imagine me in a robe that has a little short white top, right? And the blue bottom was blue and white, you know. 6 years old singing, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Now you know why I didn't go into singing, right? The point is that that affirmation of relationship with the divine never left me. That notion, even though our theology is different, our understanding of Jesus is different between the Muslims and the Christians, but that affirmation at a very, very young age of relationship with the divine never left me, and I always remember the High Street Baptist Church. The next picture you'll see is a picture of the High Street Baptist Church today. And the reason why I think it's important is that the way we look at the black community, and the reason I'm talking about the black community, aside from the fact that I come from it, is that as my colleague and the second president of the Islamic Seminary of America, Dr. Ihsan Bagby, is that African Americans represent about 28% of Muslims in this country. And so we're the largest contiguous groups, because Arabs, you know, is not one group, right? South Asians are not one group, right? If you call a Pakistani an Indian, you're going to have trouble, right? So, but African Americans, by and large, are one group. And if you want to understand Islam in America and training people with Islam in America, you need to understand something about the African American community. A couple of numbers for you. Next, please. 5, 10, 30, 70. Next slide. Yeah, you got it. Right. 5, 10, 30, 70. What does 5, 10, 30, 70 mean? In 1776, and this is from the Encyclopedia of Virginia, only about 5% of the enslaved people in the United States were literate. Then if you go to just before the Civil War, only 10%. And one of the reasons it was so slow, one of the reasons that we were learning to read, enslaved people were learning to read, was because of the church, right, to a large extent. The Church of England, particularly in the English colonies, felt that people should be catechized. And in order to be catechized, you had to read. And so, but everybody didn't believe this, everybody didn't follow that, and everybody was part of the English colony. Just before the Civil War started, antebellum, it jumped to 10%. During the Civil War and right after the Civil War, the literacy rate jumped to 30%. What does this mean? In spite of the obstacles to learning, the African American community was about learning. Because the reason I bring this up is because we tend to present the African American community as being enslaved and couldn't do anything. But if you go back and study African American history, as I have done and some of you have done, you'll find that we, the formerly enslaved and the ex-enslaved, formerly enslaved, and the people who were enslaved were a very literate people. So 5% 1776, 10% just before the Civil War broke out, 30% during the Civil War, and in 1910, in less than a generation, 70% literate. In less than a generation. And remember, these are relatively poor people. These 4 million people who were manumitted, in quotes, who were freed, in quotes, were very poor. Some of you have read about this in books and history. But in spite of that, education was of value. And it was the religious community, and Dr. Goldmer talks about this in his book. It was the religious community that, to a large extent, supported the education of these formerly enslaved people. So it's 2 points here. Number one, don't think of the African American community as a monolith and as people being formerly enslaved and they couldn't read and they weren't doing anything. And if you look at this building right here of High Street Baptist Church today, as opposed to what it was when I was a kid, you'll understand that many of us, including myself, learned our leadership skills, our organizing skills, ways to make, as we would say back then, and the Christians here know what I'm talking about, a way out of no way, right? You know what I'm talking about? A way out of no way. We talked about Islamic Seminary in America making a way out of no way. Professor McGee will tell you that, because when we opened up, we were opening up a national seminary graduate school with $60,000 in the bank. That's a way out of no ways. And so I began to learn those things. That I don't cut myself off because I say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. I learned those things when I was at High Street Baptist Church. The second list of numbers is 40, 60, 25, 4, right? And then I ended with Black America doesn't live here anymore. 40, 60, 25, 4, Black America doesn't live here anymore. In 2010, Eugene Robinson from the DC area, he's a columnist with the Washington Post, African American, he wrote this book called Disintegration, right? The Splintering of Black America. Disintegration, the splintering of Black America. And so what do the numbers stand for? 40, 60, 25, 4, Black America doesn't live here anymore. What the number stands for is that 40 years before he wrote the book, 2010, 60, the next number, 60% of African Americans lived at or near the poverty level. I was part of that group, by the way. I was born by that time, right? 40, 60, 25, 4, Black America doesn't live anymore. So 40 years before he wrote this book, 60% of African Americans lived at or near the poverty level. Fast forward to 2010, that number had dropped to 25%. I want you to think about that for a moment. In a very short period, that number had dropped from 60 to 25%. It does not mean that racism has gone away. It does not mean that people stop, unfortunately, killing black people in the street. What it does mean is that the social cultural ethos of the black community had changed. If somebody could give me some water, I'd appreciate it. Right? So 40, 60, 25, 4, 40 years before, 60% of African Americans lived at or near the poverty level, and that number dropped in 2010 to 25%. And he argued, thank you, he argued very forcefully using census data, wasn't making it up, that instead of one Black America in 2010, there were now 4. 40, 60, 25, 4, Black America doesn't live anymore. Why did he say this? He said one of them was that 25% that still were struggling at poverty and finding it much harder to get out. The largest group, and I think it's still true today, are 60% are people like me, who 50 years ago, yeah, I've been around that long, who were amongst that 60%, but through education, right? Education being very important, and getting a job, not at Howard or Hampton, but ended up in the middle class. And I'm not an anomaly. Just a thing for the Muslim community to really recognize, and for the former president of the United States, we won't name him here, we won't recognize is that all black people are not poor, right? Every time people talk about black people, they talk about being poor and being victimized. Howard University is one reason that all black people are not poor. Hampton University is another reason all black people are not poor. You follow me? The educational opportunities offered in these institutions like this is another reason. And so, but people often treat us like we're poor. That means they often don't ask me for any money. That's nice. Seriously, never think about, I've worked with nonprofit Muslim organizations. They never think about asking black people for money, right? Because they assume that we're relatively poor. But 60% of us are solidly middle class. This is according to the census data. This is not somebody's idea. So 40, 60, 25, 4, black America doesn't live anymore. So two of them are the obvious ones, the large middle class, 60%, the 25% of people who are poor and really are finding it hard to get out of that poverty. And then there are two more. One is the people who are the actually two parts. They call them the emergent. One part are people who have come into the United States since the 1960s when the racist immigration laws were changed. And they were racist. I don't use racist often, but the immigration laws were racist. They favored white people up until the 1960s. On the heels of the civil rights movement, there was a change in the immigration laws. And what you had is more people coming from the Caribbean, more people coming from Africa, and by the way, there's some people in this hall, more people coming from South Asia and the Middle East, right? There were more people coming because the racist civil rights laws were passed, racist immigration laws were done away with. And so in the Muslim community, there are more people who look like me who are not culturally like me. Barack Hussein Obama is one of them, right? Because his father was from where? And his mother was from another K, Kansas. Right? Right. And so the point I'm trying to make is, even though he looks like me, his hair sort of like mine, social culture, when you listen to the story, he spent a little time in Indonesia, right? Right? And he had, quote, white grandparents. And so he's a little different from the people who are descendants of formerly enslaved people. That doesn't make him not black. It just means that there are many more people like him, mixed race, right? And coming out of that immigration, his father, right? And so that group, the emergent group, this has two parts. One, people who are offspring of interracial relationships, marriages, and two, people who have immigrated. He calls them the emergent. And the final one is called the transcendent. The transcendent are people like Barack Obama again. After all, how many of us get to be president of the United States? Right? Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, who's the Secretary of Defense? Lloyd Austin. I'm telling you, 50, 60 years ago, we would only have one of those, and they would be in Jet Magazine. Black people know what I'm talking about. Most other people don't know Jet Magazine, right? So the reality is that things have changed. 40, 60, 25, 4, black America doesn't live here anymore. So if you're thinking about training leadership for the black community, you need to think about the changes in the black community and the way to approach those changes in terms of leadership. Okay. So, the next stop is Jesus. I want to tell you that teaching at Jesus was a life-changing experience for me because, first of all, I met Dr. Taha, Dr. Zainab, and others on the faculty, and Professor McGee, and I found out that the dream that I had of building Islamic institutions in this country that were of, by, and for the people in this country was something that could be done, right? It was something that could be done. It was not impossible, right? It was, if you look at Jesus and you look at Tisa, you'll see that the DNA of Jesus is in Tisa. And I would invite you, because it'll take a while, if you Google Sis and Al-Alwani, you'll find that what Dr. Al-Alwani was saying in 1996 is what we're saying in 2023. That our vision is a world bettered by ethical leadership and religious knowledge. That's Dr. Al-Alwani, right? This is something that I did, he's been talking about for years. And so the DNA of Jesus is in Tisa. I mean, we've talked a bit about him, and so we're going to come back to him at the end. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what's different about Tisa, and what are we trying to do, and what are we trying to do in terms of the kinds of things we learned from Dr. Al-Alwani? First of all, you can see here that the four people at the bottom, one is Arab, one is South Asian, one is white, and one is black. I looked at that one day and I said, wow, we didn't choose them because they were Arab, South Asian, and black. We didn't. We choose them because these are some of the smartest people except me. I'm an imposter. These are some of the smartest people I know, the people here. These are four of our faculty members. And one of the things that you understand about us, and Dr. Al-Alwani did this as well, we often have people team teach, and their women are often teaching on the faculty. I want to tell you that you'll go to the so-called best institutions that are secular institutions, and you won't find this kind of thing in the institution. That is, team teaching, because one person doesn't know everything, right? And males and females working together to teach, because often, depending on what you're teaching, you have different perspectives. Okay. So, religiously rooted, number one, contextually relevant, and let's speed up because I know that I'll go on too long. All right, wanted to tell you about 3 classes and books from those classes to give you an idea of how we think we're a little bit different. One is Managing Muslim American Cultures and Identities. The second one is Islam and Gender in the Contemporary Context. And the third is Islamic Evolution. Let's take a look at it. So the major book that we use for Managing Muslim American Cultures and Identities is a book that was published when I was 8 years old. Wow, that's an old book, right? This book was published in 1954. And I use it constantly. One of the reasons I use it is that the way we talk about race and gender in this society is often destructive. Destructive. The way we in this country talk about race and gender is often destructive. I always have books for everything. There's a book by a colleague who's Episcopalian priest, talks about racial healing. He says, his name is Harlan Dalton, who's an Episcopalian priest and on the faculty of Yale Law School. He said, we are loath to talk to one another about race. We hate it. And there's a good reason, because the way we talk about it, these days, people are saying that either you're a racist or anti-racist. And this thing is popular in higher education. Either you're a racist or anti-racist. There's no in between. You know the people, you can look them up. This does not make any sense to me. And the reason it doesn't make any sense to me is that there are points along a spectrum around people's feelings about different races. You're not either racist or, and just because I don't declare myself a anti-racist, then I must be racist. Think of the people that you're alienating. think of the bridges that you're burning before you even start by using this kind of construct. Yet, in many colleges and universities, these kind of constructs are what's there. And people who don't get on the bandwagon, who don't say they're anti-racist, then you must be racist. If we want to build a community, this is problematic. And so the reason I use the nature of prejudice is because Allport talks about prejudice in general and where it comes from. He talks about 5 levels of acting out prejudice in any situation. He talks about the fact that no matter where you go in the world, that hasn't changed since he wrote the book. Most people like to be with people who are like them, eat the same food, talk the same language. That does not make them racist. Yep. It does not make them racist. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite phrases in that book is that he says is that foreigners are strange. That's to say, after, code switching, you know what code switching is, right? Acting like everybody talks the same way here at Howard or at wherever you are. When you get home, you want to relax and speak the language that's most comfortable for you, tell the jokes that are most comfortable for you. I should be stopping soon. I have to. Right? You want to speak the language most comfortable for you. You want to tell the jokes most comfortable for you. You want, and I know this is a touchy issue. You want your grandchild to look at you. This is touchy in the Muslim community. This is a very touchy issue. To me, that doesn't make you racist, right? Racism or whatever ism comes into play when you, Dr. Jean Baker Miller in her book, Towards a New Psychology of Women, in the first chapter, says that the problem comes in when you make the difference a deficit. That is, because you're different from me, you're less than I am. So I don't have a problem with a Pakistani masjid or a predominantly black university, as long as people who are different don't feel uncomfortable when they walk in the door, right? And so if you're predominantly something, and if you want to build that better community that Martin Luther King, the beloved community that Martin Luther King talks about, then even though you're there eating your food that you like and telling the jokes you like, when a stranger comes in the door, and almost all of us have this in our faith tradition, you're supposed to make him or her feel welcome. And if you don't, then we have a problem, right? And so the reason I use the power of prejudice is simply because there are all kinds of isms going on in the world, and that we need to work on them. Intersectionality is the fancy word that they use for it, and we need to build relationships. Okay, I could obviously talk about that for a while, but I'm supposed to move on. Next slide, please. That's the nature of prejudice, sorry. Next slide, please. All right, the next course is Islam and Gender in the Contemporary Context. Next slide, please. All right, so we use books like this one. It's called Gendered Bodies. This is a book that's very famous in feminist studies and undergrad. So remember, we are a Islamic institution led by somebody who's stereotypically very conservative, Yasser Qadhi. Some people who know Yasser Qadhi know what I'm talking about. But this is a course that he's teaching, right? And so one of the things that we do is we expose people to the ideas outside of us that are trending in American society that we as families and young people might deal with, and we talk about them, and we read them, and we give them their due. We don't read them to put them down. We read them to understand and understand where they come from in order to prepare us to live in a world with a variety of ideas, right? And we'll read them right alongside of Islamic books like this one on the same issue, The Liberation of Women by Qasim Amin, and we read them in the same class, right? We don't not read from the feminist perspective because we don't agree with them, because this is something that's going on in society. This is something that our youth are going to encounter, and we should be about the business. Right, next slide, please. The third one is Islam and Evolution. I put it up there, even though all all the faculty are guys, but anyway. I put it up there simply because we often pair internationally. This was an international course co-taught with Al-Alwani Institute in the United Kingdom. And what we did is that it was set up as an undergraduate course. We added Dr. Yasser Qadi and Dr. Khadija Yahya, my daughter, by the way, to the course and added more work in order to have our students look at an issue that has befuddled many, many Muslims. And what we did is bring in scientists, right? We brought in theologians, and we looked at Islam and evolution. So this is giving an idea of what we, in fact, do. I'm winding down now. So academically rigorous. Might surprise you to say that one of the places that we focus in terms of academic rigor is an admissions process and a writing requirement, simply because the reality is that we are a graduate school. There's a lots of reading and writing, and if you can't read and write at the graduate level, we don't let you in. I mean, it may seem so obvious, but it isn't, particularly when you're a religious institution. All of us know what that is. Oftentimes, we let people in because we want them to be in, they're a good person, but the reality is that it's academically rigorous. We have an Arabic language requirement, which is not very easy for people whose first language is English. I'm one of them. And we have a Quranic recitation requirement, which with memorization and using the science of recitation. Why did I use this as an example? Because we think there should be a floor under the people who call themselves religious leaders with a master's degree in Islamic studies. And there's certain basic things that they should know. Okay? So finally, as we wrap up, a couple of things. So taking a look at the book by Dr. Goldman and the 5 arenas, I mean, for us, family life, the congregation, I'm talking about Muslims, education, voluntary associations, published and popular media are very important. Example of this is, again, one of our faculty members, Dalia Mugahed. You can find this in ISPU. We're just waking up to looking at families from a research perspective. And so Dalia Mugahed is one of the leading persons. She's not the only person. Dr. Rania Awad, who's also a colleague, she's at Stanford full-time. I don't know how she can be because she's doing so many things in the Muslim community. She's a medical doctor and a psychiatrist and an ustada. She studied classical Islamic studies. These are the kinds of people that we have in our classrooms trying to pull on both the academic and the practical at the same time. So in terms of family, we see this. In terms of congregation, we have on our faculty our former president, Dr. Issam Bagby, and he did American Mosque 2020. And we're trying to catch up, Dr. Larry. We're trying to catch up because we've just begun to think about how you train people to deal with the variety of congregation that we have. And Dr. Issam Bagby is in the forefront of that. Education, we have a Sunday school movement too, right? There are people in here who've been educated in Islamic Sunday schools, just like the Christians have. We have a K-12 movement as well. We're not as well formed as the Christian community. And you look at GSIS and Cordoba University, but for people like Dr. Taha, who was a cleric too, right? He was a religious leader too. He wasn't just an academic. Just an academic, that sounds bad, right? No disrespect to academics, right? He wasn't just an academic, but he was a religious cleric too. He started GSIS and Cordoba, which became Cordoba University. And Zaytuna College is a very famous example. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, he started that institution, the first accredited liberal arts Muslim institution in the United States. And so, again, Muslim clerics have been very active in building education. And of course, TISA, particularly with Dr. Yasser Qadi and Omar Suleiman. They were very instrumental in starting it. And I just want to begin to wrap up by talking about something called HELM, which isn't in the Muslim community, which I'm pushing the Muslims to do. HELM is higher education. I forget the last names, but it's a group called the Disciples of Christ. It's a denomination in the United States. What they have about 350,000 members, right? We Muslims have about 3 million. Sometimes we say 30 million, sometimes we say 10 million, but it's most likely we have about 3 million, right? Which means we have about 10 times the disciples of Christ, right? The disciples of Christ have 27,000 students in higher education today. Think about that for a minute. Only 350,000. They're about 1/10 our size, right? Have 27,000. 15 undergraduate schools, Texas Christian University, you've heard of it, is one of, these are accredited schools. These are not schools that are, quote, just religious schools, but these are accredited universities. They have 15, right, accredited undergraduate schools, and 7 seminaries. We barely have 4 or 5. We do. And so that group of people understand what the future is about. If they want their children to grow up and remain within their faith, if they want their children to make an impact on the community, they need to build higher education. So this is a pitch to the Muslims here, right? But the point is that this is the kind of thinking that we're doing to push people to build higher education institutions. Voluntary associations, the largest one, ISNA, ICNA, IIIT. We've been very active in that, and again, clergy has been very active in that. And publish in popular media. Everybody publishes now, right? Twitter, Instagram. I mean, even if they don't have anything to say, credible to say, they publish it anyway, right? Again, we won't name presidents of the United States here, right? I want you to, as I close, I want to close you with 2 thoughts. One, this is a message to everybody. It's easy for higher education to become too progressive. Higher education institutions, every time Pew Charitable Trust, every time people do surveys, they find that people who teach in higher education institutions and people who graduate from higher education institutions are more liberal than the average American. I want you to think about that for a moment. You too, Dr. Zainab. The people who teach in higher education institutions, people who graduate from higher education institutions are more liberal than average Americans. I spent 30 years on the faculty of an undergraduate school, and I understand why. Because most of the people at my institution either didn't believe in God or acted like they didn't. It's the same thing. They acted like they didn't believe in God, right? And so, they're teaching the next generation of leaders, you follow me? And no wonder there's pushback in the society against the people who go to Congress, the people who end up in the Supreme Court, because these are the people who learn things like whether you're woke or not. I mean, I just don't believe in a lot of stuff that they learn there. And so, and there's an example of this that we should take from history. This book here is called The War Against the Weak. 600 pages of documentation how we as a country warred against people who were seen as less than. The eugenics movement, right, in the first part of the 20th century, right, was a major movement in the United States. People, and listen to me, in schools were learning eugenics out of textbooks, right, Larry? They were learning out of textbooks. This is a big thing, right? How many people had Kellogg's cornflakes this morning, or Kellogg's anything, right? Anyway, if you do, John Kellogg, where cornflakes came from, was part of this eugenics movement because they were trying to build a super race. You can't make this stuff up. They were trying to build a super race. And at carnivals and at fairs, they would have family competitions to see who had the better teeth, who were stronger. I mean, really, like they judge pigs, they judge families, right? This was going on in the United States. Nazi Germany learned some of their ideas from the eugenics movement in the United States. Go back and look it up. This is not made up stuff. So what's my point here? This movement was led by the Carnegie Corporation. They had a headquarters at Yale University, one of my alma maters. They had a headquarters at Stanford University. And in 1927, people ever heard of Oliver Wendell Holmes? Right, Supreme Court Justice, liberal Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. A very famous case came before him. It's called Buck versus Bell. Buck versus Bell. What was it about? It was about, okay. It was about, it was about a young white woman from Charlottesville, Virginia, not far from here, not far from Roanoke. People know Charlottesville more than they know Roanoke, though, because Thomas Jefferson and all that stuff. But her name was Carrie S. Buck. They brought her as a test case to the Supreme Court. And what they wanted to do is because they thought she was unfit to procreate, because they called her imbecile. There's a book about her called Imbecile by a guy named Cohen. And again, these are the liberals, right? Oliver Wendell Holmes was of the Boston Brahmins, right? These are liberals. And you know what Holmes said? He said, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. As a result of this liberal-leaning leader in the Supreme Court, as a result of these liberals, of these liberal institutions or higher institutions, over 60,000 people were sterilized in this country forcibly under the color of law. Under the color of law. Anybody want to guess which state sterilized the most people? Which state? Mississippi. California. Liberal California. Go look it up. So my point about this is that it was the liberals, it was the educated people. This eugenics movement started after World War I, when people felt like their best and their brightest were killed in World War I, and we have to get these drunkards and these imbeciles, we have to keep them from procreating. I want you to notice that I didn't say black one time, right, in this, because they began aiming it at white people. Because the Jim Crow laws took care of the black people. The lynchings of 4,000 people during this period took care of the black people. These eugenics laws was aimed at white people who they thought were defective. My whole point here is don't think that because you're liberal, don't think because somebody else is liberal that you're not capable of doing great evil, right? And again, the final point is that you want to be rooted in your religion. You want it, whether you're Christian, Muslim, or Jew, you want to be rooted in your religion. You don't want to be rooted in the ebb and flow of what's going on in society. Wrapping up here for real here. All right. So this is about, it's easy for higher education to become progressive. Eugenics gained much support, right, from progressive reform thinkers who sought to plan social development using expert knowledge in both the social and natural sciences, the educated people amongst us. All right, so Ali, he stole my ending. So I'm going to give a different ending.
We can stand here twice.
Right. No, here's the thing, that if you want to read it, you can read it in the journal that is edited by his daughter, Dr. Zainab, the Journal of Islamic Faith and Practice. All you do is Google it, Volume 1. The whole thing is there. If you want to read it, you want a copy of it, it's free. It's an open source institution. But I want to close with 2 thoughts. One, identity. Ali, you steal from me, I steal from you. It's only fair, man. Right? So the point is that who are we and what are we about? as Muslim Christians and Jews? Are we about following the next progressive movement? Or are we true to our faith that, for me, as I understand Islam, Judaism, Christianity, is about the uplift of humanity? Right? We might not all agree on what that is, but my point is that you have to tie yourself, you have to root yourself in your faith. Last book here is a guy, Stephen Carter at Yale Law School, who wrote a book in 1994 called The Culture of Disbelief. I think it's still true today. In it, he argues that in the United States, many people are made to feel as if their religion should not matter. You should not bring it into the public square, right? And you should not use your religion as a basis for making decisions, which is counterintuitive, right? And I think this is why the extremes have taken over the public square, right? The extremes, the extremely liberal, and the extremely conservative have taken over the public square, because many of us don't stand up to them and say, no, that's not my Islam, like Dr. Taha did. So just remember that whatever we do, it should be religiously rooted. And what Stephen Carter says is that people often do what's called political preaching. What he calls political preaching is that they decide how they feel about abortion. They decide on how they feel about race relations, and then they go into the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, and they cherry pick in order to support it. And he said we ought to not do that. And, let me close. Two guys who really, I think, agree with Dr. Todd. One was Martin Luther King, right, who said, we're caught in a web of mutuality. I cannot be what I want to be until you are what you ought to be. The other is Martin Luther King. Malcolm X, he says, I'm for truth no matter who speaks it. I'm for justice no matter for or against. And I invite you to make sure that whatever you do, right, is religiously rooted, contextually relevant, right, and academically rigorous within your institutions. Thank you for listening to me. Assalamu alaikum.